Is Taph actually broken? Well, in this video, I'm going to be analyzing Taph, given a breakdown of how balanced he is to actually be able to determine if Taph is simply broken, just absolutely OP and needs a nerf, or if people are just gassing him up because he's a new character. First, let's go over his abilities to get a deeper understanding of how Taph functions, since just off that already, we can have some basis to help us rate him, to see if his abilities are fair or just straight up broken. The first ability Taph has is called Tripwire, which is just a tripwire he places on the ground. If the killer walks over it, all the survivors within 100 studs of Taph will have the killer's aura revealed for 8 seconds. And on top of that, the killer gains slowness 2 for 4 seconds. Some extra details for these abilities is that Taph can only place 3 tripwires at a time. After that, if he places another one, the first one will disappear. The tripwire has a total health of 20, so any killer can just M1 it once and it'll completely destroy it. Over the course of 150 seconds, which is 2 minutes and 30 seconds, the tripwire becomes less visible after being placed. The tripwire also despawns after 80 to 85 seconds. So essentially, tripwire is very effective in stalling the killer, disrupting his flow and chases. Every time the killer walks over the tripwire, he just gets slowed, and now everyone near Taph knows where the killer is at, which lets them rotate effectively to avoid the killer, which is wasting time. And even if the killer doesn't go over the tripwire and he destroys it, it seems pretty simple and not significant, but if you played with or against Taph a lot, you know that second or two it takes you to destroy that trap is enough for players to just run away. Or even more frustrating, if they are good players, they'll see you about to destroy the trap and just stun you by predicting the fact that you're just going to destroy the trap. So even though this ability seems very simple, it's also very annoying. But that doesn't make Taph OP. This isn't something that is broken or needs to get nerfed. It's a very similar playstyle to Builderman, where a very good Builderman can just waste your time as killer and constantly disrupt your chases. There are instances where Tripwire can be broken, but we'll go over that later in the video. For now, this ability seems normal and fair. His second and last ability is Subspace Trip Mine, which is essentially just a bomb that Taph throws in front of him. After it being thrown on the floor, it goes semi-invisible and slightly reveals itself every 13 seconds. When the killer gets within the radius of the trip mine, it'll detonate after 0.5 seconds, and the killer gets Helpless 1 for 3 seconds and Subspace 3, making the killer's vision very blurry, dark, and on top of that, it forces their camera / screen in a certain direction, which lasts about 5 seconds. If Taph gets caught in the radius of the trip mine, he'll also get Subspace 3. The mine can also be detonated by attacks from the killer, so any ranged ability will detonate it. But you can also M1 it and get lesser effects for destroying it before it detonates naturally, which is just a 0.5 timer. If you destroy it before that, you as the killer will get lesser effects, so you'll only get Subspace 1 instead of Subspace 3 and Helpless 1. If the mine is just chilling, then in 35 seconds, it'll just explode by itself. Now this ability, I have seen a fair share of people complain about it because it just disorients their vision so much and makes them off track, and I think it should get nerfed to not make it as disoriented. But I don't really agree with this, just because the mine is very easy to see. If you're playing anyone aside from Jason, there isn't a reason why you should be getting hit by the trip mine. They can be countered pretty easily, but that's not even the only thing wrong about nerfing this ability. If they nerf the trip mine, then Taph just isn't good anymore. You take away the little bit of leverage he has, it'll just make him an easy victim for the killer. So I think it's a pretty balanced ability for the most part. It has its ways to counter, but if you're not on your A game and you fall into a Taph play, then it'll be pretty rewarding for Taph. Not anything too crazy though, but that's how it's supposed to be. If you get outsmarted as killer, there's consequences, and likewise for survivors. If you make a mistake or get outsmarted, you just have to face the consequences, and that's balance. It'd be unfair if the killer or a survivor just always had a getaway, or circumstances that always favors one side. Like Tripwire, the trip mine is also useful in wasting the killer's ability and or time, because if you place it in a very good spot, and let's say it's the only place where the killer would be able to reach you, if he wants to do that, he has to counter the trip mine first, which is going to help you and the survivors get away. But all of this so far seems fair. So why do certain people think Taph is very OP and overrate him, saying he needs a nerf? But does he really need a nerf? This whole time, I've been practically observing Taph as a singular survivor, maybe even two in one game. When it's just one Taph or two Taphs, they're good, but not necessarily some threat that is unfair to the killer. So the question is there any situation where Taph is overpowered? Because if some people are complaining about it, it has to be for a reason. Which I think there's an obvious circumstance where Taph becomes absolutely broken. And it's the reason why people have mixed opinions on Taph. On one side, they think he's mid and he's not really good, but some people think he needs a nerf. He's too overpowered. They're sick of him. That circumstance is when the lobby is essentially only Taphs. From personal experience and what other people have said too, when there's like at least 4 Taphs, it becomes obnoxious. There's constant tripwires everywhere, trip mines everywhere, which means you constantly have to be destroying tripwires, trying to counter trip mines, and you only have so many abilities. You're bound to get hit by a trip mine, or even just a simple tripwire. It makes it so hard to wipe a team because you have to address its abilities. So if not, it's just as impossible to try and walk through all the trip mines and wires. Everyone's just going to run away and plant even more. So with Taph, when there's just 1 or 2 in your lobby, it doesn't seem like he's broken. If anything, he seems pretty balanced. Just like any other survivor, he has his pros and cons. But when you take a whole lobby of Taphs, it generally just is one-sided for survivors because it's so many things the killer has to destroy to get to the survivors that he'll spend the whole game destroying tripwires and trip mines. And that's being generous, because realistically, you're probably going to be getting hit by almost all of them. So Taph isn't necessarily overpowered. I think people only think he's OP and that he needs a nerf because they run into lobbies where there's a lot of Taph stacking. And this is something that the developers themselves have actually addressed. I think they're doing the correct thing, which is that they're only going to nerf Taph stacking, not Taph himself, which makes sense because Taph by himself, or maybe even one more Taph, isn't a threat. But a whole lobby of Taphs is miserable. Imagine a lobby of Buildermans and Taphs only. Yeah, I think you get the point already. I think Taph is truly not overpowered or unfair for killers. He's pretty balanced, but since Taph stacking is very unfair and overpowered, the people just think Taph himself needs a nerf. When obviously, as we looked at and talked about, the abilities themselves are fine. It's just the Taph stacking. In conclusion, Taph isn't broken when he isn't stacked. When he is stacked, he is absolutely broken. Let me know what you guys think about this in the comments. If you made it this far in the video already, you might as well subscribe to the channel, since only 0.2% of my viewers are actually subscribed. It helps out the channel a lot and helps me make the content you guys want. Thanks for watching. See you guys in the next one.